Welcome back, guys. Jonathan here with What's This Weapon? You can sort of see what this is right away, but it's got some stuff on it, and is one of the roughest things we've had on the series so far. Let's take a look. Pretty obviously, this is a 1911, the Colt 1911, and it's a 1911A1. In fact, interestingly, this is quite noteworthy in itself, actually, or it would normally be if they hadn't butchered it. This is a Remington Rand made 1911, which is they were a typewriter company. One of a number of firms that converted over to warlike materials, as it were, or objects in the Second World War. So it's an American, obviously service pistol. It's 45 ACP. We know the 1911. It's ubiquitous. It's almost the self-loading pistol, or it was before the Glock came along. So what have they done to it and why? And who are they? I suppose are the questions I need to cover in this video. Well, again, somewhat up front, this is IRA. So this is provisional IRA produced during the Troubles. 1970s is the best I can do with this. We have absolutely no documentation on this, except that it was at some point seized from a member or a cache of the IRA in Northern Ireland. It is extremely reminiscent of something else, which you will either know or you won't, but it has, I think, some gangster heritage to it, which we'll cover at the end, just to explain what I mean there. But let's go through the actual piece, as it were. It's automatic. It's fully automatic, or at least it would have been. In fact, it would have been selective fire, i.e. switchable between semi-automatic and automatic, or fully automatic if you prefer. And in order therefore to control that, or to try to control that, that's why we have a massive great foregrip with a welded on, or is it brazed on mounting block on the dust cover of the frame here, and this huge great carved wooden grip, clearly handmade. This is a shed style operation here, or I mean, it's often said that the terrorist arms from both sides, IRA and loyalist terrorists, were making things after hours in machine shops in factories where they were working. I have no idea if that was the case here, but it could have been. And there's a big old, I was going to say bolt, but it isn't really. Almost looks like that's just been slipped over and then peened on like a sword pommel. I'm not entirely sure. So that gives you your foregrip. Pretty essential if you've got a fully automatic pistol. They operate at a very high rate of fire due to the low mass of the slide. We also need to be able to control it with a buttstock. However, I'll just gently rock that back and forth without hopefully putting any wear on it. This is a museum piece after all, despite appearances. This is wobbly as heck. It's quite heavy gauge steel. I mean, I'd hesitate to call it wire. It's too thick for that, really. So it's robust, but if I try to actually hold this thing, and it's not too bad in terms of the ergonomics of how it would fit in my cheek, as it were, and it's long enough or short enough to perhaps function adequately, but it's incredibly wobbly, and that's not from wear from use. That's just been badly fitted. This catch here, you probably worked out how that works. You pull it back. There is a spring in here. Pull it back, drop it off. In fact, we'll leave that off for the moment, and you can see they've just created. So there's a dovetail, a bit like you get on stocked pistols. Well, almost since the beginning, flintlocks onwards, really, you get these stock pistols. So it's dovetailed in, and then there's a pin here engaging with a hole here that roughly keeps it quite securely on. It's just really wobbly. And then the final concession to fully automatic fire is the magazine. So the magazine catch remains where it normally is, but due to these massive thick grips, which I will explain soon, it's hard to reach the magazine catch. So really you need to come in with your support hand, press the catch. It's awkward without, well, it's just very awkward. And then pull out. There we go. So you're definitely not doing your John Wick reloads with this thing, put it that way. And the magazine will amuse/horrify some of you, I'm sure, in that it is just, so that is actually welded rather than brazed. It's been a separate, the feed lips have been cut off a second magazine body, and the two have been welded together, and then they've ground the welds off, which gives you that kinked shape. That's not going to be the best for feeding. I mean, that also applies somewhat in the lateral plane as well, although what looks like a bend I think is mainly damage. There's a great big dent in the bottom half of this homemade extended magazine, so that's not great either. Now that's doubling capacity from 7 to 14 rounds. Drop another one in the chamber and you've got 15 rounds at a rate of goodness knows what, probably about 900 rounds per minute. We don't know, and there's no real way to find out, but if you compare it with, this isn't the only full automatic 1911 that anyone's ever made. You might well be able to find examples and work out what the rate of fire is likely to be. There is another modification before we get into how this thing might have worked, which is this huge additional extractor on the right side. It's actually not quite dovetailed, but slotted in to the side of a cut in the slide, and then a great big spring thing is bolted in or screwed in over the top of that. So it's like a massive double extractor. So I think we can take from that they got far enough with this thing that it was actually operating, but failing to extract. Quite likely it was ripping through the base of the cartridge case and leaving it in the chamber, and therefore double feeding and jamming. I don't know if you can see this, but the best way to show the two halves of this story, as it were, is to just open the chamber and show you. But they've actually cut away a fair bit at the back of the barrel of the chamber to let that huge, great, solid steel claw get in there and get over the rim of the cartridge case. So that tells a story, I think. So we have this a very roughly cut hole in the frame here. In fact, you can see where they've started it with, I guess, a pillar drill with a small bit, and drilled in and then just like cut out the steel. And then they've welded on an extension to the internal sear that keeps the hammer in the cock position and is normally pushed by the trigger bar. You can see it operate there. There it is poking into sight in the hole, which allows you to press on this from the outside and the hammer will fall. Well, it's obviously not meant to be done with the fingers. There's something that's supposed to bear on this and drop the hammer with you holding the trigger down, because this is an automatic firearm where you have to hold the trigger down to get all the bullets to fire. But there's something interfacing with this, is what this is telling us. We also have a housing here of some sort, but to see anything else, we need to remove this grip. So in traditional Blue Peter fashion, I have pre-prepared our two screws here. They're just the grip screws for the 1911 grips. Something's gone horribly wrong here. Let me show you the full glory of how horrific this woodworking is. Design and technology teachers all over the land cringing hard at this. This has been done with the butter knife, I think. No, I don't know what it's been done with, but it's not good. Been done hastily, presumably. And they have taken off so much material that it has actually broken, worn through. So set that aside, and that gives us, well, not the full story, unfortunately. We are missing some critical components here. So that housing I mentioned here, that contains a spring plunger. I'll just show you that. Is returning something to a resting position. And a second, I'll show you at that angle, there's a second steel housing welded on here, or attached somehow, braced on. And that contains two vertically acting plungers, much like this one, but smaller, one on this side of the housing at the top, and one on this side on the bottom. And they are interfacing with either one rectangular shaped piece that's moving up and down, or some other arrangement of components. We are missing some of the story, but what we can say, based looking at other full auto conversions of 1911s, is that most likely around the grip screw boss here that holds the grip screw was pivoting an auto sear, as it's generically known. So we have the main sear for dropping the hammer normally, and then we have an auto sear for dropping it every time the slide comes home. So you're holding down the trigger, you fire the first shot, slide comes back, it comes back forward. Normally there's a disconnector, well, the disconnector's still in here for semi-automatic fire, that literally disconnects the hammer from the trigger and the hammer stays back. That's normal semi-automatic operation. We have to get around that to make the thing fire bursts or automatic fire. So that's what this would have done. Pivoting around here is some sort of shape, rounded shape, device, component rather. And, well, let me show you again on the camera here. There's a cutout of the slide is a great big, well, look at the rear, see it better. There's a great big square notch here at the back, and a cutout running not all the way along, fair way down the slide, about halfway down the slide, and then sort of feathering out at the end. And this is to trip that automatic sear. So as the slide comes back forward again, that shape there, that 90-degree angle, is smacking into the top of this auto sear, which pivots around this boss I mentioned and smacks into the extended sear here and drops the hammer, all the while you're holding the trigger down. So it's automating the process, literally automatic fire. So that's the basic principle of how this would have worked, and there would have been some sort of switch, presumably protruding out of the front of this slot on the grip. We don't know what shape that would have been or how it would have been operated, but it would presumably have pushed a component up and down with those spring plungers helping to sort of retain it in the up or the down position, something like that. And that engages or disengages that mechanism that effectively bypasses the disconnector to make it automatic. I hope that makes any sense. It's very hard to show you because several components are missing. In fact, there are two holes drilled and threaded here. Big one here next to that grip screw boss, but I think it's too far over for that to be what the auto sear device is pivoting on. And then below that is a little tiny one by the opening for the magazine. And in one other full auto conversion, we can hopefully show you a picture of that so you can get a sense of what this thing might have looked like. That was anchoring a spring to again help this bolt-on mechanism on the side actually function. So this, in other words, this doesn't match any known conversion system exactly, but it's quite close to an American system that is in a really good article on the Small Arms Review website that we'll certainly link to and probably show you a picture of so you can see what a complete equivalent to this would look like. It's not identical. I've not found any 1911 conversions that have this weird T-shaped standoff housing with those two little plungers in it. That's unusual. Perhaps someone watching has seen that somewhere. The terrorist organizations, among others, are looking at homebrew designs for things, but they're also innovating on their own and coming up with ways around. They might think they can do it better. Arguably, they couldn't. We don't know. Or they might be just copying it absolutely wholesale. In this case, they probably based it on an American conversion, a later 70s era conversion, and then gone their own way with it. It doesn't appear to be based on the 1930s version of this, which is what I was alluding to at the beginning of the video. So some of you might have looked at this and thought, John Dillinger, maybe. Maybe you've seen the movie Public Enemies, which is really good, by the way. And a friend of mine, Larry Zanoff, and his colleagues at ISS worked on that, and I've seen the props. They made a modern movie version of this using 38 Super 1911s, not 45 caliber 1911s, which is correct because there's a criminal armourer working for the Dillinger gang, among others, I think, called Hyman S. Lehman. Little is known about him, but he came up with a full auto conversion for 1911s, and Dillinger himself, I believe he was captured with one of these. And Babyface Nelson was another user of these full auto 1911s in this rough configuration. Buttstock, extended magazine, not always extended magazine, and Tommy gun style foregrip. In fact, some of them have Tommy gun foregrips on them, which are a bit nicer than this one. So I have to assume that there's a little bit of glamour associated with the Dillinger or Lehman style 1930s Chicago gangster conversions of 1911 pistols, and that has been the inspiration for this Irish Republican Army, Provisional Irish Republican Army attempt at the same idea. Was it a success? Well, no, insofar as it was captured by Her Majesty's government. Did it successfully function? I don't know. I assume these parts were not removed by the MOD. I assume it was captured in this state, which suggests that they've been having some problems with it and tinkering with it. But I'm at risk of speculating there. And the final reason that this is of particular interest to me is I first saw this in the Observer's Book of Firearms when I was about 8, I think it was. So my dad had, I think, 2 books on firearms, and I would read them sort of cover to cover repeatedly. This was before the internet. So I was very, very familiar with this bizarre-looking gun and realized what it was and what it had been turned into. At that young age, didn't necessarily fully appreciate the politics and the social history around that. But equally, this was a time when things were still blowing up in mainland UK, so I wasn't unaware either. So all of that together makes this a fairly iconic modern museum piece for me, and I hope for you as well.